at all. And every one of Donald Trump's letters to these countries, every one of them in the last line says, and I, Donald Trump, can change any of these tariffs at any time, depending on, and this is the word he uses, our relationship with that country.
In the complex world of international trade, trust has always been a foundational pillar. For decades, Canada and Japan stood as unwavering allies in the U.S.-led global order. Their trade relations with the United States were seen as stable, predictable, and mutually beneficial. But under the leadership of Donald Trump, those traditional alliances have been rattled. On July 10, 2025, President Trump made a bold and unexpected move, imposing a 35% tariff on all imports from Canada, effective August 1st. Just days before, Japan was hit with a blanket 25% tariff on its exports to the United States. These tariffs were not isolated incidents but part of a broader, disruptive strategy that has defined Trump's approach to foreign policy, one that replaces structured agreements with unilateral decisions, shifting deadlines, and a constant reliance on leverage. The tariff policy is no longer just about trade imbalances, it's about power dynamics and using economic pressure as a political tool. But this approach leaves countries like Canada and Japan in a precarious position. They have been thrust into a world where trade is no longer predictable and where alliances no longer guarantee stability. As these tariffs were announced, Trump's letters to Canada and Japan made one thing clear: they were not set in stone. The president included a stark warning: if either country raised their tariffs in response, the U.S. would retaliate with even higher duties. The message was simple: play by America's rules or face economic consequences. These tariffs were a reflection of Trump's broader strategy to wield economic power not only to correct trade imbalances, but also to send strong, personal messages to leaders abroad. In essence, if the relationship is right, the tariffs may not last. If not, then the economic leverage would continue to mount. For Canada, the situation has become particularly tricky. Already burdened by tariffs on aluminum, steel, and copper earlier in the year, the new 35% duty sent shockwaves across Canadian industries. Even though Canada was still engaged in active trade negotiations with the United States, discussions expected to conclude by July 21st, the timing of these new tariffs appeared to be no coincidence. While publicly, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's government refrained from escalating tensions, behind the scenes, Ottawa has quietly sought alternatives. Canada has pursued strengthened trade talks with ASEAN, and in July, the foreign minister confirmed progress toward a free trade agreement. Canada is also deepening its strategic ties with Japan, signing a defense and intelligence sharing pact in the Indo-Pacific. This approach reflects a new reality. While Canada continues to maintain strong relations with the U.S., its economic future cannot depend solely on Washington. Japan, meanwhile, responded firmly to the imposition of the 25% tariff. The Japanese government condemned what it termed economic coercion, emphasizing its commitment to protect its domestic industries and jobs. But Japan is not content to sit and wait. Instead, Tokyo is pushing for closer economic ties with Southeast Asia and Europe, forging relationships that do not come with the same level of uncertainty and strings attached as those with the U.S. Japan's move is emblematic of a larger trend. Countries that once relied on the United States as a cornerstone of their foreign policy are now seeking to diversify their partnerships and secure their long-term economic stability beyond Washington's grasp. What's emerging from this geopolitical shuffle is not a world where allies turn against the U.S., but one where those allies, faced with economic pressure, are rebalancing their foreign policy to hedge against the volatility introduced by Trump's tariff-first diplomacy. These countries, rather than being anti-American, are positioning themselves in a world where diversification has become not just smart, but essential. They are choosing stability over uncertainty, multilateral cooperation over unilateral pressure, and long-term strategic alignment over short-term economic gains. As the deadline for new tariffs draws nearer, both Canada and Japan continue to reevaluate their options. The U.S., under Trump's leadership, has made it clear that tariffs will be imposed unless new trade deals are struck. But as countries like Canada and Japan show, the tariffs imposed on them by the Trump administration are not the end of the story. They are simply a catalyst for change, prompting countries to explore new alliances and strengthen existing relationships elsewhere in the world. The clock is ticking, and the pressure is mounting. President Trump's aggressive trade policy is reshaping the landscape of international relations, and as countries rush to meet his demands, it is becoming increasingly clear that this strategy is not just about balancing trade deficits. It is about imposing a new global order, one in which the United States, under Trump, plays by its own rules, leaving partners to adapt on the fly. But as deadlines loom, the uncertainty and instability Trump's trade strategy has created are forcing countries to make difficult decisions. Some are scrambling to reach agreements, while others are quietly pursuing alternatives. Perhaps the most striking example of this evolving dynamic comes from Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney, in the face of tariffs and growing pressure from Washington, has made a strategic decision to stay silent. The usual playbook for dealing with Trump's aggressive tactics would involve public concessions and behind-the-scenes negotiations. But Carney is not following that script. Instead, he is playing a longer game, opting for a quiet but strategic silence that leaves Trump with no easy options. While the world expected Canada to cave under pressure, Carney's calm approach has sent a different message. Rather than making rash decisions in a bid to quickly end the crisis, Canada has held firm, maintaining a position that prioritizes long-term stability over short-term gains. This is not the knee-jerk reaction the Trump administration was anticipating. And as the July 21st deadline approaches, the world is watching to see whether Canada will continue to resist Trump's demands or yield to the looming threat of new tariffs. For Trump, this is a pivotal moment. He has built his entire trade policy around the concept of fast, visible wins, quick deals that reflect his image as a tough negotiator. But Carney's restrained response has put Trump in a tough spot. What happens if the pressure doesn't work? If Canada holds firm, Trump risks looking weak and losing the credibility he has so carefully cultivated as a tough, deal-making president. On the other hand, if Trump escalates the tariff war, it could trigger severe economic consequences for both countries, especially in sectors like steel, automotive, and agriculture, which rely heavily on cross-border trade. The stakes are high, and Trump's ability to navigate this impasse will likely shape the future of his trade policy and his presidency. Despite the lack of public movement, behind the scenes, Carney has been working diligently to ensure that Canada is prepared for whatever comes next. In the absence of a deal with the U.S., Canada has turned its attention to diversifying its trade relationships. The country's focus on strengthening ties with ASEAN countries, particularly in the energy and technology sectors, is part of a broader effort to reduce its dependency on the U.S. As Canada explores new avenues for trade, it is also investing in its domestic industries, such as clean energy and housing, to ensure economic resilience in the face of shifting global dynamics. Japan, too, is taking a similar approach. In the wake of the 25% tariff, Japan has responded with strong language, denouncing what it sees as economic coercion. But Japan's response is not just about protecting its own industries, it is about repositioning itself in a world where the U.S. no longer provides the same level of predictability. Like Canada, Japan is deepening its economic ties with Southeast Asia, Europe, and other parts of the world, building relationships that are not contingent on U.S. trade policy. For Japan, the future lies in diversifying its trade partnerships and securing a stable economic environment beyond the reach of Trump's tariffs. The broader message emerging from this global shift is clear. The U.S. is no longer the undisputed leader of the free world. Allies are no longer relying solely on Washington to safeguard their economic and strategic interests. Instead, countries are recalibrating their foreign policies to account for the volatility introduced by Trump's administration. While the U.S. remains a powerful global player, its actions under Trump's leadership have created a new era of uncertainty, one in which countries are learning to navigate the world without depending on Washington as their anchor. In many ways, Trump's trade policy is rewriting the rules of global diplomacy. It is pushing countries to reconsider their relationships with the U.S., to think about alternatives, and to prioritize long-term stability over short-term gains. This shift is not about turning away from the U.S. altogether. It is about finding new avenues for cooperation and ensuring that no single country, whether it's the U.S., China, or any other global power, can dictate the terms of trade for the rest of the world. As the clock ticks down toward the August 1st deadline for new tariffs, the world waits to see how this global trade drama will unfold. The next few weeks will be critical in determining not just the future of U.S.-Canada relations, but the trajectory of international trade and diplomacy in the post-Trump era. As the August 1st deadline looms, the pressure is only intensifying. The world is watching closely, but it's not just Canada and Japan that are feeling the heat. The entire global trade system is in flux. Countries that once relied on the stability of the US as an economic partner are now having to pivot quickly, recalibrating their foreign policies to account for the unpredictability that comes with Trump's tariff-first diplomacy. One of the key players in this ongoing drama is Brazil. On July 9, 2025, Trump issued a sweeping 50% tariff on all Brazilian imports, effective August 1st. This move was the highest tariff announced so far in his administration's new trade war, and it has significant ramifications, not just for Brazil, but for the broader global economic landscape. For Brazil, the 50% tariff is a direct escalation, but it is also a warning shot to other countries still negotiating with the US. Brazil has already been at odds with Washington over its handling of former President Jair Bolsonaro, and the tariff announcement made it clear that Trump is using trade not just as a tool for economic leverage, but as a way to send political messages. But while this tariff was harsh, it wasn't unexpected. The real shock came in the form of a Section 301 investigation into Brazilian imports, a move that Trump had previously used to justify long-term tariffs on Chinese goods. The investigation is not just about trade imbalances, it's about making a statement. In the past, trade deals were negotiated with diplomacy and at times compromise. Now, under Trump, the message is clear. Nations that don't play by his rules will face the consequences. This approach is having a ripple effect. The 50% tariff on Brazil isn't just a negotiation tactic, it's a political tool, a way to target countries that may be drifting closer to China or other global powers not aligned with Washington's interests. This move toward using tariffs to send political signals is becoming a hallmark of Trump's trade policy. Europe, for instance, is still deep in negotiations with the US, trying to finalize a deal before the August 1st deadline. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has confirmed that talks are active, but with significant challenges still remaining. Italy's economy minister has already warned that the text may not be finalized until the very last minute. In Canada, Prime Minister Carney's team has also been working tirelessly behind closed doors, negotiating under a tight deadline. But what's significant here is the recognition that all of these countries are operating under the same pressure. Negotiations are no longer just about trade agreements, they're about survival in a world where tariffs have become a tool for political leverage. With the clock ticking down, countries are scrambling to meet Trump's demands, but they are also looking for ways to protect themselves from the fallout of his tariffs. For many nations, including Canada, Japan, and Brazil, the strategy is clear: diversify. In the face of US uncertainty, countries are seeking new trade partners, especially in Southeast Asia, Europe, and even Africa. Japan, for example, has strengthened its relationships with ASEAN nations, and is pushing for tighter cooperation with Vietnam and Indonesia. Canada, as previously mentioned, has turned its attention to ASEAN and is deepening its energy ties with countries like Malaysia and Singapore. The economic focus is shifting away from the US, even as these countries continue to engage with Washington on trade issues. But diversification is not just a matter of finding new markets, it's about ensuring long-term stability. In the past, the US has been seen as the anchor of the global economic system. But under Trump's leadership, that anchor is beginning to look more like a ship that could sink at any moment. As allies move away from reliance on the US, they are also looking for alternative centers of power, centers that promise a more predictable, stable, and cooperative environment. This shift could have far-reaching consequences not just for the US, but for the global economy. Countries that have historically relied on US trade deals are now finding new avenues for growth, while the US itself risks being left behind in a world that no longer sees it as the only game in town. The tariff deadline of August 1st represents a critical juncture in this trade saga. The next few weeks will determine not just the fate of Canada, Japan, Brazil, and other key allies, but the future of US trade policy. Will Trump back down and reach deals with his allies, or will he push forward with more tariffs, further alienating the very nations he claims to protect? The outcome of this trade war will shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come, and the consequences of Trump's strategy will be felt far beyond the economic sphere. As the world waits for the final outcome, one thing is clear: the global economic order is being rewritten before our eyes. The days of relying on the US as the undisputed leader of the free world are over. What remains to be seen is whether Trump's approach will succeed in securing short-term victories or whether it will backfire, leaving the U.S. isolated in a rapidly changing world. For now, countries like Canada, Japan, and Brazil are charting their own paths, and their